Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to do something a little bit different than what I'm used to. I am the mammal guy, as most of you know. I love bears, love large carnivores. But today's presentation is going to be a really cool one because it's still in my wheelhouse in the fact that we're going to be dealing with apex predators, so to speak. But today's presentation is going to be birds of prey, hunters of the sky. And so what I'm going to do, hopefully I'm going to spend about the next 45, 50 minutes going through a slide presentation, and we're going to be learning about all the different predatory birds that we have floating around our skies. Now I will tell you there's gobs and gobs of different species, but we're going to focus on North American species. We won't be worrying about any other continents. But even though we're focusing on North American, we're just scratching the surface. There's no way I can cover all birds of prey in the hour or so that we have together, but I'm gonna hit the highlights and have an extra special treat for you today. So again, want to welcome you. By all means, ask questions. I'm gonna pause periodically to ask you guys questions, but if there's something you don't understand or you miss or you didn't really catch, raise your hand. Let me know that you need some clarification. That is why we are here. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and we're going to be talking about birds of prey today. So to get things started here, got to do my wildlife experience for the folks that get this recording. Y'all know who I am, I think. My name is Daryl Radijek, wildlife biologist, have my degree in wildlife management, managed wildlife throughout my career, the last 25 years or so, working for the Appalachian Bear Center, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, just all over the place. Also worked in many different locales from East Tennessee, the eastern side of the United States. For the last 4 years, I've been in the West. As a young boy, I always wanted to live and work out West, and so that's what I'm doing now. But what I wanted to do is I brought in a special guest. We're going to be talking about birds of prey today, which, like I said, my wheelhouse are the mammals, the bears, the cougars, all the big, scary, fun, large carnivore type of animals. And so my specialty is not necessarily birds. I can talk biology, but I'm not the greatest at IDing. So I brought a special guest today, and he is joining us from Tennessee. Many of you know Bob Houdeshell. I talk about him all the time. Amazing photographer, but he's also an awesome birder. Bob, if you want to give a little background about yourself really quick, and then I'm going to use you as the color commentator to help me give helpful tips for identifying some of these birds.
Okay, I'm so flattered that you asked me to chime in here. I sometimes question my expertise. A lot of times I take a picture, go home and realize it's not what I thought it was. But I am getting better at all the IDs. But I worked for a long time as a mechanical contractor, retired last year, and now I get to shoot every day if I want to. And I am shooting an awful lot. Matter of fact, tomorrow I get back in the furry critters. I've been shooting the migratory small birds a lot in the last few weeks. But that's about it.
So what I'm going to do is when we get to talking about some of these individual species, like I said, Bob is a much better birder than I am, and hopefully he can give us some helpful tips for identifying some of those species. And yes, I know Canada geese are not birds of prey, but I thought that was such a beautiful picture. I put that in on Bob's write-up. Okay, so let's get started here. What we're going to do is literally sit here and talk for a little bit about birds of prey, these predators of the sky. And so the first thing we got to do is we got to figure out what exact birds are we talking about. When I talk about birds of prey, there's lots of birds out there. And so if we just talk about birds that eat other animals, that doesn't work, because when you think about it, we have lots of birds out there. Help me, is this a field? Bob, what is this?
Yes, it's a field sparrow.
Okay. I was about to say something else. Field sparrows, you have them eating insects. You have brown thrashers also eating insects. Even terns, you see that tern there has a frog in its mouth. So those three birds I just showed you, are those considered birds of prey? No, not typically. That's not what we're talking about, because whenever we're talking about birds of prey, usually there's other characteristics that help us classify it as a bird of prey. And they're really simple. And just so you know, none of these are like hard facts, but this is generally how we lump things together. So those other characteristics we're looking for when we're talking about a bird of prey is these birds have really keen eyesight. And when I say keen eyesight, way, way, way better than human eyesight. Usually they have what we'd call telescopic vision. They can see things from a long, long distance because they're hunting animals. And so oftentimes these birds solely rely on their eyesight in order to pick up those prey items. So they have tremendously strong eyesight, very keen eyesight. Another characteristic of birds of prey is that they have these really powerful and sharp hooked beaks, because if they're capturing animals that they're going to eat, oftentimes they have to kill them first, obviously. So they have to have a very powerful beak, and these beaks are usually fairly large, hooked, and extremely strong. And then last but not least is an ability to grasp or catch the animals. And so oftentimes birds of prey, not everyone, but oftentimes birds of prey have very powerful claws, or what we call talons, and they're curved, they're very sharp, and so they can latch on. And the thing is, once they latch on, they rarely ever let go. I worked with a buddy of mine that was grabbed by an owl one time in his belly, and it wouldn't let go for quite some time. Anyway, those are the three things that really help us identify what is classified as a bird of prey. And so using those characteristics, what are we left with? Because y'all know that there's literally hundreds and hundreds of bird species in North America. And so when we look at what is left, they're classified as mostly as what we call raptors. Now, before we begin talking about what are raptors, what are not raptors, I think it's really cool when you look at the root word. This is actually where my Latin has come through for me, but raptor comes base word from Latin, rapiere. So if you look at the root meaning of that, it literally means to seize or to capture or to take by force. And I think that's such a great description, because whenever we're talking about raptors, most of you probably understand or have heard that term before. You think of these powerful birds that literally take by force their prey items, whether or not it's a rabbit or a mouse or anything. So it's a frightening thing if you're a small animal, but these are powerful predatory birds, which I think are pretty darn special. So when we're looking in the world of raptors, there's two primary orders. And when I'm talking about orders, again, we're going to that Linnaean classification. If you remember from school, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, all that stuff. There are two primary orders of raptors. First off, there's what we call Falconiformes. And so that order of birds includes a whole bunch of different groups underneath it. And so generally we're talking about hawks, we're talking about eagles, ospreys, vultures. There's a couple other groups in there, but like I said, we're only going to be talking about the more popular ones. We can't cover everything in an hour. But for the most part, that covers a large grouping of these predatory birds, or these raptors. Now, there is another order that falls into this classification as a raptor, and it's called Strigiformes. Now, some of you may remember this. I don't know, I can't see a show of hands, but we did a webinar about a year ago that was Whisper in the Woods, is all about owls. And Strigiformes is the order that contains owls. So Falconiformes has a whole bunch of different groupings underneath it. And then Strigiformes pretty much have owls underneath it. Those two orders are what literally make up all the raptors that we know and love. Here's an easy way to differentiate between the two. When you're talking about falconiformes, those are daytime hunters. They rely on the eyesight, they rely on daylight in order to see things and to capture their prey. Whereas strigiformes, the owls, are more or less nighttime hunters. And so it's pretty cool when you begin to segment out why some birds fall in this category, why others fall in that category. But for the most part, those are the two primary orders of the birds that we're going to be talking about today. So what we're going to do now is jump in and we're going to talk about some of the more specific groups. And we're going to start with falconiformes. And so we will begin with eagles. Now, there's two primary species of eagles in North America. Everyone knows the bald eagle. What is the other one? Anyone know? Golden eagle. Very, very good. So here are these two eagles that I just mentioned. There's the bald eagle, and that is the golden eagle. Now, the one thing that you have to understand when we're talking about eagles, eagles are they are not the largest. There's another bird that's larger, but eagles make up some of the largest raptors or birds of prey that we have. They can be really, really large. We're talking 7-foot wingspan. And so one of the things that you do to help differentiate, obviously there's color of the bird, there's shape of the bird. Size of the bird can really help you determine what type of bird you're dealing with. So some of the largest raptors we have are the eagles, especially the golden eagle. Now, this is where, Bob, I might call on you to help us along here, because some people, sometimes myself, get confused differentiating between a golden eagle and an immature bald eagle. And so if you look at these pictures, the one on the left is the immature bald eagle, the one on the right is a golden eagle. Is there anything that helps you differentiate between the two when you see a bird and you know it's an eagle? And is there anything in particular you're looking for? If you're talking, you might have to turn your microphone back on.
Yeah, I guess the dumbest statement here would be, like a lot of birds, once you see, like both species, both eagles, you never make the mistake again, because the golden is so much bigger than the bald even. It flies differently if you see it in the air. It's got a little different wing beat. The bald eagle has quite a few more strokes than the golden if you compare them, if you watch them fly. They both don't soar a lot or glide a lot either. And then, of course, the greatest thing is if you see a golden in the eastern part of the United States, it's a big deal. So your first guess will always go immature bald eagle. If you're out west, a whole lot more likely to see a golden. But again, you see goldens a lot at elevation too.
Yeah,
there's not a great answer there except for experience a lot of times.
And I think that's the perfect answer, because a lot of the wildlife work I did, it's literally it becomes an art form where you become good. You can recognize subtleties that are just difficult to explain to people, but after seeing so many different birds or so many different animals, you can recognize them and you can get really good. And I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but when I was in college, we went out to Montezuma Refuge, which is in New York, and my instructor, the professor, they were teaching us about waterfowl. And I remember as soon as we got out of the vehicle, we saw these birds at a great distance, and they were flying towards us. But you literally saw just specks off on the skyline. And right away he says, "Oh, here comes a flock of widgeon." And I was thinking, you're crazy. You can't see those. You have no idea what those are. And sure enough, they came in and they were widgeon. And just like Bob described, these little subtleties, the way they fly, the formation they fly, the wing beats, The more and more you do this, so if you want to get into birding, just get out there, practice and practice, and you become better and better and better at these things. It does help if you're not colorblind and tone deaf, though. But anyway, they're really beautiful birds. Immature. Remember, that bald eagle is not going to get that white head until it's about 4 or 5 years old. So it's going to be looking like that bird on the left for a number of years until it gets some age on it. Eating habits. Very, very different. Bald eagle versus golden eagle. The bald eagle is what we call piscivorous. They oftentimes depend on these large bodies of water, whether or not it's a large river, lake. They like eating fish. That's the piscivorous aspect of it. And so eagles are very, usually you find them by these larger water bodies, whereas a golden eagle is not piscivorous. They are more forest-dwelling birds. And so oftentimes you'll see them on carcasses. They'll take small animals. They'll feed on carcasses. This is actually a really interesting picture, which is going to lead to something that Bob just mentioned. Working back in Tennessee about 7 or 8 years ago, we started getting reports of golden eagles, more and more golden eagles being sighted in Tennessee. And like Bob said, that's a really, it's a real rarity to see a golden eagle. And so we started this study. In fact, Scott Summershoe, who is my ornithologist when I was back in Tennessee, headed up this golden eagle project, which is really, really cool. And this picture here is actually a trail camera from Tennessee in which they staked out a deer carcass that had been struck by a vehicle, and they put it high up in the mountains in Tennessee, and sure enough, they started getting pictures of these golden eagles. And so they started this project in which they were trying to learn more about these golden eagles because it was a rare event to capture them in Tennessee. And so they began this project working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because all migratory birds are regulated through the Fish and Wildlife Service because they don't stick within one state. They're sharing multiple states. And so what we did is we captured a number of these golden eagles that were coming into Tennessee. And if you see that little thing on the back of that golden eagle, first off, you can see how big that bird is. It truly is a very large bird. And then we would affix these transmitters on the back, these tracking collars. And it was really awesome because you would put that tracking device on that golden eagle, and we wanted to know where it came from, where it was going, why it was stopping in Tennessee. And the cool thing with that transmitter is it would collect data, and it would download data whenever it was near a cell tower. I don't know what plan they were using, but it would gather this data, and then if it was out of range of any cell towers, it would keep collecting the data, but it would store it, and then it'd do a big data download as soon as it came within range again. So you're tracking this bird, you're seeing where it's going, and then it would go silent for months on end because it would be nowhere near a cell tower. And then all of a sudden you get all this data, and then you would see the track that it took. And I'm about to show you the track. Hopefully it will be large enough for you to see. But that is North America. We captured this bird in the mountains of Tennessee. And if you see some of the tracks, this is multiple birds there, but some of these golden eagles that we're catching in Tennessee were flying all the way up to the Great White North. I think that's Baffin Bay, all the way literally to the Arctic Ocean. And so when they would get that far north, they would disappear. There's no cell towers up there. They'd literally disappear for months on end. Obviously, it'd be the summertime. And then all of a sudden we get this big data dump, and you're like, oh my gosh, this bird went all the way up there. Truly remarkable project. Scott Summershoe and the rest of the folks at the Fish and Wildlife Service did a fantastic job. But it was just so gosh darn interesting to see where these birds were migrating. What's even more interesting, when you zoom in on their track using Google Earth, these birds, I mentioned they are forest-dwelling birds. These birds stay over trees all the time. They do not like crossing large bodies of water. They do not like crossing wide open fields. farm fields, they stay over the treetops. And so they will be following these corridors of trees all the way up there. And this is why wildlife connectivity and maintaining the habitat is so important, because it really helps these animals out, even the birds. Okay, that's enough about eagles, because we got a whole lot more to cover. So the next group of birds, or raptors, that I want to talk about, we're going to talk about hawks. Now, there's a couple of different categories of hawks. And so we're going to start with the hawks. And this is an awkward word because it's a scientific term. These hawks are called bootios. That's the scientific classification of them. And literally what we're talking about here when we're talking about these bootios are these broad-winged hawks. These are the more or less the soaring hawks that you see high up in the sky over fields. Like I said, they're the broad-winged. They're very good at gliding and soaring. And so there's a couple of hawks in this group that are really common. For example, the red-tailed hawk, which is probably the one that most people know. We also have red-shouldered hawks that a lot of people could identify. Another one is a broad-winged hawk, so it literally goes by its classification. These are probably three of the more common ones. There's a number of other bootios that we're not going to talk about. There's ferruginous hawk, Swainson's hawk. There's lots of different hawks. I'll leave that up to you to research and see some of these other less common hawks. But the red tail is probably the most common, red shoulder. Bob, when it comes to seeing hawks, especially these bootios, would you say red tail is most common?
I would say it's in East Tennessee anyway. It's 50-50 red tail and red shoulder. But overall, yeah, I'd say red tail is more common.
And what is the best way to differentiate between the two? Because those are probably the two most common, is red tail and red shouldered. Like when you see a bird soaring overhead, what are things you are looking for?
Those two get pretty easy to separate if you can get some sun on them, because the red tail shows his tail. When he flies, it fans out, and it's red on the underside.
And we will.
It also has a belly. It has a belly band where the red shoulder is much more. What's the right word? I guess.
Well, this is a red tail, correct?
That is a red tail. See, it's got a belly band, so to speak. Also on the spots, whereas the red shoulder will have the whole belly, whole chest, basically, will be spotted.
Okay. Now, as compared to eagles, these hawks, these bootios, are generally a bit smaller than the eagles. And so we classify them as kind of medium to large in the world of raptors. They do come in all variety of colors. Like I said, these are just some of the more common ones with the red tail, red shoulder. But there's a whole bunch of other bootios out there that you can look at. But really, really beautiful birds. Now, when it comes to their eating habits, again, these are the broad-winged hawks. They're really good at soaring, really good at gliding. So whenever you're driving around and you're in an open field and you see a hawk, whether or not it's sitting in a tree, on a telephone pole or line, or just out there, or just gliding over the field, more than likely it's going to be one of these bootios, whether or not it's red tail, red shoulder. That is how they hunt. They go over those fields looking for small mammals to feed on, whether or not it's mice or voles. They'll even feed on snakes. And so there's a picture of a red-shouldered hawk feeding on a snake that it had captured out in the field. But for the most part, these hawks are feeding in the wide open. Now remember, their most powerful characteristic or sense there is their eyesight. And so I forget what magnification it is, but like I said, it's more or less binocular type of vision. And so they can spot these animals from a long, long ways away while they're soaring above or while they're just perched in a tree overlooking that field. Okay, those are the Bootios. Now we're sticking with hawks. There's another big classification of hawks that is personally one of my favorites because I've been working with them quite a bit lately. And the next group, again, this is a Latin term, doesn't mean anything much to you, but these are what we call the accipiters. And literally what these groups of hawks are, these are the forest dwellers. And so what's neat about the forest dwellers, there's three primary accipiters that most people see and know. There might be a few more, but the primary ones, you have the sharp-shinned, you have the Coopers, and you have the goshawk. These are what we classify as these forest-dwelling birds, or these forest-dwelling hawks. Now, the cool thing with the sharp-shinned, Coopers, and goshawk, they're all kind of versions of each other. The sharp-shinned is the smallest, Cooper is a little bit larger, and then the goshawk is even larger still. The reason why I love these so much is because these guys are the acrobats. They're amazing flyers because you have to understand they're going after small mammals in a forested situation, and you know what the forests in the east especially look like. They are loaded with trees and branches and briars and brambles. And so what I wanted to do is to show you a video. I've watched this video numerous times, and I want to show you a video to show you how dexterous these birds are at flying. Hopefully this will work for everyone. If you don't see the video, don't fret. When you receive the recording, you should be able to watch it on the recording, but hopefully this video will work out for everyone. Some of you may have seen this before because it's so gosh darn impressive. So sit back and watch. This is going to be a video of how acrobatic these accipiters or these goshawks are.
We're going to test Ellie to the absolute limit. This is how it's going to go. She is going to be on the other side of this wall, and I'm going to be here with the lure, which means that to get it, she's got to fly through that hole. We're going to shrink the size of the hole, we're going to change its shape, and I've got another dastardly trick up my sleeve. First, in real time. Now, slowed down. And now by 40 times. Slow motion reveals how, with her wings closed, her large tail acts as a third wing, creating the lift that she needs. Let's make the hole smaller. If you look at her eyes, you can see her protective nictating membranes closing. They're semi-transparent eyelids that keep out the thorns. Now I'm going to rotate the slit to simulate the small gaps between trees. Ellie seems able to mould her body to any shape. Next, I want to simulate a tunnel through the undergrowth. Amazing. Ellie turns the situation to her advantage, using her legs to launch herself at her prey.
Anyway, I thought that was an amazing video. The way, I guess the best way to describe it, you see kids these days doing parkour. That's where they jump on walls or over fences. They're the parkour experts of the bird world. So imagine being a mouse or a rabbit and you sense this bird flying in the sky. and you think that there's no way that bird can maneuver, they're just incredible with their dexterity, not only flying around trees, but literally bouncing off trees. I've watched a couple of videos where they're using their talons and just propelling themselves off the trees as they're flying through. So pretty crazy, amazing birds, and those are what we call the accipiters. Just getting my slideshow back up. Any questions on those? So far we talked about eagles and hawks, the broad-wing hawks, as well as the forest-dwelling hawks. All right, I'm going to keep on chugging along here then. All right, we're doing good on time. So next group of birds we're going to talk about, going to be the ospreys. I guess I would liken them more towards maybe an eagle rather than a hawk. They do tend to be water dependent. They are piscivorous as well, very much like the bald eagle. If you've ever heard the term a fish hawk, that is generally what they're talking about, are these ospreys. Very distinctive bird, large bird, only kind of osprey we have in North America. So size-wise, you're getting up there, usually much larger than the hawks, about similar to a bald eagle in size. Again, I gotta thank Bob for most of these pictures. The nesting structure, I don't think this is Bob's picture, but the nesting structures are usually what identify ospreys. If you're driving along a large river or a large lake and you see a platform, whether or not it's a man-made platform that has this huge pile of sticks on it, that is typically an osprey nest. Now, oftentimes state wildlife agencies will put those platforms in the rivers to assist these birds, but you will even find osprey nests in trees. Sometimes you'll find them on docks. You'll find them in all sorts of places, but the nesting structures are very indicative of an osprey, really large structures, but absolutely beautiful, beautiful bird. Again, these are raptors, very sharp talons. There's a couple of pictures I'd love to show you. I didn't have the rights to them. But just amazing talons, extremely sharp, because when they're going after the fish, they just got to get one of those talons in that fish, and it literally spears it much like a fish hook. And so these birds are incredible birds, very common birds to see around, but absolutely beautiful, beautiful animals. Don't worry, Shirley, you could go back and watch the recording. Okay, we're going to start dropping down in size here, and we're going to talk about a different kind of raptor. Not too popular. You don't hear too many people talking about harriers, but I think they're absolutely gorgeous birds. Sometimes people refer to them as marsh hawks. Again, these photos that Bob provided are absolutely fantastic. Bob, is there anything particular that you look for that identifies a harrier right off the bat? Actually, I think I have the next picture here. When I was reading up on these to help identify, it mentioned the white rump patch, and this was your only photo that you can see that white rump patch. I don't know how distinctive or how easy it is to see, but is there anything that you look for in the flight, in the coloration, that really identifies the harriers for you?
Yeah, the white rump patch is actually a lot easier to see than you would think. But the other thing is they fly more like an owl than they do a hawk. They fly very flat. That first picture of the female, of the male, I mean the gray one in the snow, he's dead level about 12 feet off the ground. And you won't see a hawk do that a lot. They're a little more up and down. But yeah, they're pretty easy. The only thing you can mistake them for is a short-eared owl at times.
Yes.
Because their faces look kind of similar.
And it's amazing that you mentioned that. Just so you know, Bob and I never rehearsed this talk, so he's seeing these slides for the first time. And I think it's wonderful that Bob mentioned that distinctive flight pattern, because I had that slide as next. One thing that's really cool about the harriers is they fly lower to the ground, and they literally follow the contour of the ground. So if they're 20 feet off the ground when they're flying, and it drops down in a hill or goes up a hill, those birds literally stay that same height. They literally just follow the contour of the ground. That could be an adaptation that helps them spot their prey more readily because they're at a constant distance to that ground. But it is a very distinctive flight pattern. I love how you described they fly more like an owl. Speaking of that, and it's true that harriers are so much more owl-like, because believe it or not, they have facial characteristics like an owl. They have what we call a facial ruff. It's literally the feathers on their face give it a little dish shape, much like an owl, because that definitely helps them key in on those prey items more. And so that facial ruff is very owl-like. So your description of reminding you of an owl is spot on. And so we don't have, I think we only have one species. Is it the northern harrier? There's many harriers in the old world, Europe and Asia, but here in North America, we just have the one species of harrier here. So that is going to take us to another group of raptors that we're going to talk about. And so we're going to lump a number of different birds into the falcons. And these are what we call, or at least I call, the speedsters. I think these are really cool birds. Beautiful, beautiful birds, and you'll see why in a second. But the three primary falcons, and again, these are not all the falcons in North America. You have the American kestrel, which is a relatively small bird, a small raptor at least. You have the merlin, and you also have the peregrine falcon. And so the reason I say they're the speedsters, they're among the fastest flyers. When they lock in on a target, they can hit that target. Oftentimes, many of these birds will hunt other birds like pigeons or things like that, and they will strike the bird in midair going in excess of 100 miles an hour. So it's literally like a torpedo that's hitting the prey items. But again, very, very beautiful birds. One of the things that really denotes the falcons is they have what's called a malar stripe. And literally that's that eye bar, that vertical eye bar that comes down, makes them very distinctive, very beautiful. Again, this is a picture of a kestrel. Another thing that falcons have, now this is not distinctive to falcons, there's some accipiters that have it. This is one of those things that I love teaching these new classes because I never even heard of this before. But the falcons especially, and like I said, a few other classifications have what's called a tomial or tomile tooth. And what that is, it's not a tooth, it's just a formation in their beak. That indentation there where the yellow arrow is pointing, literally what that is designed for is these birds are oftentimes catching small animals or small mammals, and that little indentation helps them break their neck or dislocate their neck quickly. So when they capture a rabbit, mouse, vole, whatever it is, they deliver a really strong, powerful bite, and because of that little indentation, it helps them dispatch that small mammal really, really quickly. So I thought that was cool. I never even heard of that before this presentation. This is probably a bad word for it. I call the falcons lazy nesters. They're probably not lazy, they're probably smart nesters. They don't build nests typically. Usually peregrine falcons will just nest on a cliff face. They'll find a little indentation. Usually there's an overhang that will help protect them from the weather, but they're not big nest builders. They might gather some nests or some down to help once they lay the eggs, but for the most part, they're just nesting on the open cliff face. This is also one of the reasons why you see peregrine falcons in some of the tall industrialized cities like Chicago, even New York City. Those birds are actually nesting on the outside edge of that building. And so they're very adaptable that way, but it's really, really cool because they just find a clear open area to lay their eggs, They might line it with a little bit, but they're not building these elaborate nests like the ospreys are. Atlanta too, yes. It's kind of funny because I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but peregrine falcons in some of the forests, especially in our forest, it's listed as a species of conservation concern, primarily because a lot of their nest sites are getting disturbed by recreational climbers. So those cliff climbers have a tendency to disturb the birds during their nesting period. Obviously, the springtime is when most birds are nesting. And so we have to put regulations on some of the cliffs, the more popular cliffs where these birds are trying to nest, to prevent that nest disturbance. Having said that, you have birds nesting on the sides of buildings, so it's really, really weird how sensitive some birds are, but not others. Okay, the next group. We don't talk about these too much, so we're gonna talk about kites. I gotta insert something corny into every one of my presentations, so forgive me for that, but we're not talking about those kind of kites. We're talking about a different kind of kites. And when we're talking about this group of birds called kites, best way to think about them is they're very falconesque, very strong, speedy flyers. But one of the things that differentiates kites more than anything is they have pointy appendages in most cases. And what I mean by that is when you see them flying, their wings are going to be much pointier. And there's a couple of different species of kites. In fact, Bob's got some fantastic pictures. These two also have adapted beaks. Many times the kites are not really going after the larger, they're not going after rabbits, or they might take mice, some of the smaller mammals. These will oftentimes feed on insects as well. You see there in the picture, besides the pointier wings, they also sometimes have like the pointed or scissor-like tails. Bob, you took this picture here, and I wish I could zoom in. What is this bird feeding on? Might have to turn your microphone.
That's from the Sequatchie Valley here in Tennessee, in Dunlap. And it's over a huge soybean field, and it took me quite a while to figure it out, but it's caterpillars. And it doesn't get dainty. It goes down and snatches the leaves right up and then picks the caterpillar out of it, which is what it's doing. I've also seen them in a different location feeding on dragonflies and catching them in midair. I mean, they're interesting. And then I've also seen them chase mice.
And what type of kite is this?
That's a swallowtail.
A swallowtail kite. Yeah, there's Mississippi kites. There's a couple of different species, but for the most part, kites will have either that scissor-like tail, or they will have those pointed wings. But their beaks, when I mentioned earlier that the raptors have these big, strong, powerful beaks, these probably have the daintiest beak of all the raptors, and so they're more designed for insectivorous type of feeding. And like Bob said, he was watching these kites swoop down in a soybean field, and at first it looked like they were picking the leaves off, but what they were doing is they were grabbing the caterpillars out of the soybeans. Okay, that's enough about kites. Okay, believe it or not, this was actually, I never really considered vultures to be a raptor. But the more and more I read, they're still in the same order of a lot of these other birds. And so vultures are really, really cool. They're a little bit different than most of these other birds. All those other groups of birds I talked about, from the eagles to the bootios to the accipiters, or the hawks, so to speak, the kites, the falcons, they are very, very predatory. They're going after those live animals and eating those live animals. Vultures are a little bit different. First off, it's probably not nice of me to say this, but I say that they're the ugly ones. What makes them much, much different than many of the other birds is their head. And when I say the ugly, that's a picture of a condor, which is classified as a vulture. They can have really disturbing looking heads. Does anyone know why or what is believed to be the reason why they have these bald heads? Very, very good. Lori, I do know, and apparently Molly knows too. Um, what makes vultures different than many of these other raptors or birds of prey is they're often feeding on dead animals or carrion. And so if they find a deer carcass or any other carcass, they're going in and getting the meat, and oftentimes they're sticking their head inside the cavity of that animal. And so when they're coming out, if they had fully feathered heads, they would be covered in goop, so to speak. And so the bald head is actually an adaptation to help them stay a little bit cleaner because they don't have to worry about the feathers getting all messed up. But I'm actually gonna go back to this photo here. Does anyone know what the bird is doing? Vultures are very well known for doing this display, spreading out their wings. Anyone know why they're doing that? Actually, vultures have a lot of disturbing, neat little facts that we'll talk about. Yeah, they do take some time to get airborne. I will tell you an interesting. I almost had a skunk go through my windshield. This is probably about 10 years ago, but driving down a country road, there was a vulture that was feeding on a fresh roadkill skunk, and it tried carrying it away. And as I was driving up to it, it could not get airborne quick enough, and it ended up dropping the skunk from about 10 feet high, and it almost went through my windshield, which I would have been the only person in the world to ever have a skunk go through their windshield. No, not picking up scent. Drying off, that's another really good question. Actually, that's literally a form of thermoregulation. And so whether or not they're cooling off or heating up depends on the sun, but it's one of the ways that they thermoregulate their body. Another really interesting thing that they do for thermoregulation, which is gross, and again, vultures are the gross ones, oftentimes they'll defecate on their legs, and that helps keep them cool. If it's really, really hot out, most of you know birds don't have solid poop and urine. They have what's called urea, which is kind of like a mush or a diarrhea, so to speak. But what vultures will do, they'll defecate on their legs because that keeps them cool. Besides keeping them cool, you have to understand these vultures are oftentimes feeding on dead animals that have been dead for quite some time, and there's a lot of parasite, a lot of bacteria. And so if they're standing on that animal feeding, they can pick up some of these nasty parasites or bacteria, and then when they defecate on their feet, it kind of sterilizes them. It kills all that bacteria. So really cool, interesting facts about vultures that, although grotesque, they're pretty darn neat when you think about it. So again, that's a California condor. Now I will tell you, these birds, the California condor, which is classified as a vulture, is the biggest of all the raptors. 10-foot wingspan, which is absolutely incredible. I would love to see them. Obviously, you know, many California condors were on the brink of extinction. I forget the number of breeding pairs. It was down to like 6 or 8. It was extremely, extremely low. But they've rebounded somewhat. You find them in the southwest, southern part of California, and along near the Grand Canyon. I have yet to see one, even though I've been to the Grand Canyon multiple times. We actually had a condor fly up and actually hung out in the Santa Fe area a number of years ago. I wasn't around for that, but extremely large, beautiful birds. Another neat thing, and again, Bob may be able to speak more of this. One of the things that I learned early on, in fact, when I was in college trying to identify birds, oftentimes you'll see birds high up in the air soaring. Now, if there's a whole bunch of them, oftentimes it's vultures. Vultures will really gang up, especially if there's a carcass. You'll see a number of vultures in an area. But if you see a single bird soaring, sometimes it might be difficult, especially if it's at a distance where you can't see the coloration or anything. trying to determine whether or not it's a hawk or a vulture. Two different things you could look for. You can look for when they hold their wings out. Hawks generally hold their wings straight out in a flat plane, whereas the vulture will have their wings more in a V shape. Another thing that you will notice, and I don't have a video of it, but when they're soaring, they're not flapping their wings, you'll see vultures, they teeter. And so it's kind of like, well, I don't know a better way to describe it, but they're catching the wind and their wings are kind of like going back and forth without flapping them, and so they teeter quite a bit when they're soaring. What else about the vulture? I'm going to quiz you guys, and I didn't even plan this, but it just reminded me. Does anyone know, you know how you have different group names when you have an individual animal? Like you have a lion, and then a bunch of lions is called a pride of lions. Does anyone know what a bunch of vultures are called? Nope, not a congress. I think Congress is the monkeys. I imagine they're pretty smelly. It's actually one of the cooler names. A bunch of vultures flying is a cyclone. And oftentimes when they're taken off from a kill, they will literally cyclone up in the air. So pretty neat about the vultures.
Hey, Daryl, let me interrupt you on the
Sure.
killing hawks from vultures.
Yep.
Scott Summershoe taught me this. He said if it just keeps soaring and circling and riding a thermal up, almost always a vulture. But he said the easy way, if you've got them together, hawk will flap, and he called it literally flap, 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 soar. And the more I watch hawks, they all do it. 3 wing beats and then they soar, or glide, or whatever you want to call it. And you know, Shue's always right. He knows his stuff, but that amazed me.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we started off with. The more and more you observe these animals, you pick up these little nuances that you don't even think about anymore. It's not like you're looking for it, but as soon as your brain sees that, it recognizes. And so I would look in the sky and you'd see something soaring up there, and it would wobble back and forth like you said. It's catching the thermal, and usually right away you can tell it's a vulture. Because from a great distance, they could be hard to see color or anything like that. What's really cool about vultures is, although their head is grotesque, they have the strongest sense of smell when it comes to birds. Most birds usually hunt by eyesight. Vultures, because they primarily feed on carrion, have a very well-developed sense of smell. And I don't know how accurate it is, but they've done some studies. Typically when an animal dies or gets struck by a car, vultures don't feed on it that first day, simply because they're finding their food source by sense of smell. And so typically it takes a day or two for that animal to begin rotting or deteriorating. And then once it gets to that point where it's emitting a strong odor from that rotting carcass, then the vultures all zoom in on it. Now, don't get me wrong, if an animal gets struck by a car and a vulture's nearby and knows that animal's dead, it will feed on it. But because they're relying on that sense of smell, it takes a little bit of time for that body to deteriorate enough to really start smelling really bad before the vultures can find it, and then they hone in on it. Interestingly enough, they will only feed on a carcass up to a certain point. And so they'll feed on it for a day or two after it has been killed. But once it becomes too, quote-unquote, mushy, the vultures will no longer feed on it. But they are tremendously helpful as far as being the garbage men of the world. They clean up a lot of this excess waste material. A body of an animal, a dead animal, does not stay on the landscape long because vultures will make quick work of it once they find it. Yeah, Shirley, that wobble is probably the thing I look for the most whenever I'm trying to differentiate between a hawk and a vulture. Okay, we are done with Falconiformes. we're now going to talk about the strigiforms, or strigiformes, which is pretty much the owls. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on owls, because if you want to learn more, everything you want to know about owls, I do have that webinar we taught last year, which was all about owls, which was a pretty cool webinar. I learned a lot on that. The cool thing with owls, they're vastly different than everything we talked about earlier. Instead of being daytime hunters, they are nighttime hunters. That's one of the greatest differences between the owls, or the strigiformes, and the falconiformes. And so they have, because they're hunting at night, they rely on a whole different set of hunting techniques and literally morphological differences that really puts them in a separate category. First and foremost, they hunt a lot with their ears. They hear these animals running in the nighttime. They also have fantastic eyesight. Don't get me wrong. But what's really cool with most owls is they have asymmetrical ears. It means they're not perfectly matched up one side to the other side. One is a little bit lower than the others. So because of that asymmetry, it allows them to really hone in with their ears where an animal is, because the sound that comes in, it comes into one ear faster than it comes into the other ear, and they're really able to pinpoint exactly where that sound is coming from. So those asymmetrical ears are designed for them to hunt more at night, where it's often more difficult to see, although they do have fantastic eyesight. Another thing that's really a common misconception when it comes to owls, so many people think owls can rotate their head around all the way. It's close, but it's not all the way. They have about 270 degrees of rotation. So think about it. In fact, try that. It's funny because before we started, I was practicing my presentation. I was thinking about turning the head, and if you turn your head directly to the right or directly to the left, it's going to be 90 degrees rotation. They can go another 45 degrees past that, so they can start looking behind them. But they can't rotate it all the way around. But when you think about it, when they're going 135 degrees to the right and then all the way 135 degrees to the left, they can pretty much rotate their head almost all the way around. It's not all the way around, though. They are also, this we taught in our owl class last year, pretty cool. They are what we call zygodactyl. I mentioned that raptors have really powerful, strong talons. For the most part, especially throughout Falconiformes, almost all of them, not all of them, will have 3 claws forward or 3 talons forward and 1 backward. There is osprey can rotate their other one, so they have 2 and 2. But pretty much all the owls are zygodactyl. They got 2 going forward, 2 going backward. If you want to take a closer look at it, it's not the greatest picture in the world, but you can see that on that branch there, he's got 2 going forward and then 2 going backward. This is just an adaptation to help them grab those animals as they're flying by. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about with the owls, which I think is their coolest adaptation, is the silent flight. Now, they do have specially designed feathers. They're hollow, the way they're shaped, it makes them literally silent in flight. I remember as a young boy camping in Allegheny State Park up in New York. I had taken a ride by myself. I was only probably 10, 11 years old. And I remember seeing a snowy owl, and I watched it for probably like 10 minutes. And the thing that struck me, besides being so beautiful, is when that owl flew away, you never heard it. It was silent. So that was one of the things that really got me interested in wildlife. But what's really cool about these feathers and how well adapted they are, I don't know if it was the BBC or who did the study, but they wanted to demonstrate how silent these owls are when they fly. And so what they did is they took a number of different kinds of birds, and I only bring 3 in here, but they put these really highly sensitive microphones in a room to detect literally the wing beat as the bird flew. And so I'm going to show you 3 graphics, and understand that these are going to be the sound waves you're seeing, which the more disturbance, the more sound an animal makes, the bigger the wave. And so this first one is literally the sound waves coming from a pigeon that is flying. And so you see, and you can think about it, I'm going to try to do it, but when a pigeon flies, you hear they're flapping their wings, they're really noisy flyers. So easy to tell that pigeons are pretty loud when they fly. The next thing they did is, I think they used a goshawk actually. It was one of the accipiters, but although it has a much quieter signal, you could see the amplitude on that wing beat. And so you literally hear that bird flying. When it's flapping the wings, you hear that wing flap. So if you're a mouse, which have really good, strong sense of hearing, you hear those wing beats, and you know that there's a predator in the sky above you. This is where it gets awesome, because here is the sound that an owl makes when it flies. Almost nothing at all. And that bird was flapping its wings as it did it. And so it's a great visual representation to show you how just extremely well adapted these animals are for hunting at night. And so you're a mouse, you're a rabbit, you're some type of small mammal feeding on the forest floor. This is a silent killer. These birds, these owls swoop down, and you don't even know what hit you because they approach you so silently. So really, really cool thing that owls have adapted to do. And so literally the bottom line, birds of prey are way cool. I'm an apex predator guy. Gotta say, these are probably my favorite group of birds of all. But before I end this, and again, I have a knack for talking way, way too long, gotta quiz you guys. Gotta see how smart you are. So get your typing fingers ready, because I'm going to put some pictures up. You tell me what kind of bird of prey it is. All right, we're going to start with the first one. Pretty simple one. Very beautiful, smallish bird. Not a kite. It's a kestrel. Remember the falcons, which American kestrel, the peregrine falcon, they have that malar stripe, that vertical eye stripe. Merlin also has those, but that is a kestrel. Small, beautiful bird. The cool thing with these is sometimes you'll see them, they hover. And so if they see something in the field and they'll take off, for a moment there, they'll literally fly in the exact same position before they swoop down and pounce. All right, what is that bird? Very good. Ospreys are pretty easy to identify. Large white bird, especially if I should have took the nest out of there, but beautiful, beautiful bird there. Okay, what is that? You don't have to tell me the exact species, but what type of raptor is that? The thing that gives it away here is that tail, that scissor tail. Very good. Those are kites. How about that? Not a hawk, Lori. Very, very good, Ginny. I was hoping some would say it was a golden eagle, but that is an immature bald eagle. How about that one right there? I should have we used this slide already, so you may remember it. Red-tailed hawk. Very good. Now, this is going to be an awkward question, but I'm colorblind to red. Is it very easy for you to see the red tail? Because it's not for me.
It is extremely easy if you can get the sun behind it.
Okay.
Get some sun on it, because it almost glows.
Okay. What type of bird is that? That's a new picture here. Remember, look at that Very good, Molly. Yeah, that vertical eye bar tells you it's probably going to be some type of falcon, and that is a peregrine falcon. Okay. All right. This one's kind of a tricky one. What would you say that is? Okay, now I'm going to be like really picky. What kind of vulture is that? And I should have mentioned there's two kinds of vultures, two primary kinds of vultures in North America. There's turkey vultures and black vultures. Lori, I'll give you points for saying not a turkey. It is a black vulture. Now, is there, Bob? What is the difference between It's the coloration underneath the feathers between a black vulture and the turkey vulture.
That's exactly what you look for. And there's some gold in the black vulture that you can see. Again, you have to have the sun to help you. But other than that, you're looking at the head. You're trying to see the red of the black head.
Now, are black vultures always black head, or?
As far as I know, I have not.
Okay. Well, sometimes it's very difficult to see the head, especially if it's at a distance. The main thing with the underside, the black vulture, the tips of the wings on the underside are white, and the turkey vulture will have much more lighter underside all throughout. And so that is a black vulture in that picture. Yes, for the most part, turkey vultures have the red head, but sometimes it's difficult to see, Lori.
What's a lot of fun,
right.
Interrupt just a minute. In East Tennessee, you can get the turkey and the black roosting together and actually flying together at times. I don't know how it is on the rest of the country, but I know they'll do it here.
Well, here's something interesting between turkey and black vultures. Turkey vultures are pretty much that they only eat carrion. Black vultures are becoming quite a problem because they are becoming more predatory. They will actually kill the animals. And believe it or not, some farms, especially if there's a newborn cow or calf, there's been instances where these black vultures will swoop down in hordes, 10, 12, 20 black vultures, and they will kill animals. And so they don't wait until an animal dies before they feed on it. They're becoming much more predatory. Okay, what's in this picture?
And the chicken farmers are having the same problem. They'll attack chickens too.
Yeah, it's crazy because most people think vultures are they'll eat the dead animals, but black vultures will actually kill animals to eat them. So what birds, plural, do we have in this picture? Trish, you've been quiet. I wonder if you fell asleep over there or a good hockey game is on. Oh, you've been typing. All right, I might have to put my glasses on. All right, it says, if vultures are raptors but they scavenge and not take prey, do any other birds of prey scavenge? I'm guessing vultures are classified as raptors because they have toenail tooth and talons. Actually, this is really good. Remember I said at the very beginning, those three characteristics are guidelines. There's no hard and fast rule. One of the things, remember, a kite doesn't have that real powerful beak, but it has the talons. It has, what was the other character? Oh, the really good eyesight. And so it doesn't have to be all three. When it comes to vultures, Trish, the thing with the vultures, they have the powerful beak. They have good eyesight. They have really weak feet. They don't have the talons, so they don't have those long hooked claws. In fact, if you look at vulture feet, they're kind of grotesque. Everything about vultures is grotesque. From the head, the feet, they have like really long toes, but understand they're more adapted to landing on top of a dead animal and feeding there. So they don't have the powerful talons to kill animals, because they don't have to. And so it's remember, those three things are guidelines, from the powerful beak to the keen eyesight to the really sharp and strong talons. Most of the raptors have all three, but some of them only have a couple of them. There was something else about the vultures I wanted to tell you, and I am forgetting now, but let me see if... Oh, it's the point to your other question. There are other raptors that scavenge. If you look at eagles, golden eagles, bald eagles, picture some of those scenes from, whether or not it's Yellowstone or Alaska. You might have a bison carcass there, or some large herbivore that died, elk, moose, whatever. Oftentimes you'll get the grizzly bears moving in, you'll get wolves moving in, but oftentimes you'll see bald eagles or golden eagles coming in on that carcass. And so although they're quite capable of killing smaller mammals that they catch, they will not pass up a meal, especially if it's a really hard part of the year, like wintertime or really cold where food's not as accessible. Yeah, there's a lot of raptors that will scavenge if need be. What I got to do, I got to make sure I'm not missing anyone's question. If anyone asked a question and I missed it, let me know. I'm going to try to catch up. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, Shirley, the opportunistic raptors. Anyway, in this picture, if people asked about it, it's an immature bald eagle that's flying, but there is a vulture in the front, and I believe that is a turkey vulture. Bob, correct me if I'm wrong. Would that be a turkey vulture in the front, on the bottom? All right. Only a couple more here. All right, what is that? Again, very, very owl-like, but there is that white rump. You can't see my cursor right now, that white rump patch. I didn't know what kind of raptor that would be. Very good. That would be the harrier. The northern harrier, to be exact. All right. We threw... Yeah, Ginny, if you come to the this Green Fire Tour, I invited Bob to tag along to serve as our professional birder. But yeah, it'd be awesome to have a couple of people that know birds. All right, what do we have here, picture-wise? Come on, someone else besides Ginny, show me what you got. I'll give you a hint. This is a forest-dwelling bird. What's called an accipiter. Nobody wants to answer? Yes, it is in the falcon category. No, I'm sorry, it's not the falcon category. This is in the accipiter. These are those forest-dwelling acrobats. This is a goshawk here. Shirley, just so you know, I think, and I apologize, Adobe Connect is doing a new update on October 20th, so 3 days from now. I think there's been enough people complaining that something went wrong that they're finally fixing it. Okay, obviously this is an owl. Does anyone know what kind of owl we have here? Very good, Lori. Good try, Trish. I had a picture of a saw-whet. I took it out. That is a barred owl, though. Saw-whets are much smaller, usually kind of golden in coloration. They also have some ear tufts. All right. Immature bald or golden? Very good, Jenny. Golden eagle. And that is one thing I noticed. The golden eagles are very, very much more golden, and like it's a brown gold. Very beautiful birds. The immature bald eagles sometimes will be more of a blackish or grayish modeling. But I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Shirley that sent me sent me a Facebook picture of a golden eagle with just the most fantastic feathers. All right, I'm really getting picky here. Can anyone? This is probably mostly for Ginny. Ginny, you know what kind of raptor this is? Lori mentioned about a PBS special about golden eagles. One of the most amazing videos, and you could Google it. Obviously, there's a lot of different raptors that are used for falconry. You could use peregrine falcons. You could use all sorts of accipiters, goshawks. Some people have used golden eagles for falconry, and these golden eagles, um, instead of the bird going after a rabbit or another small animal, sometimes these golden eagles will actually take down small deer. And so it's crazy the power behind these golden eagles. Bob, do you know what that is? Obviously, I believe this might be one. No, I don't know if this is one of your pictures or not. What would you call that, Bob? Well, I apologize. Again, I think this is the Adobe being a little wonky. It should get fixed in 3 days, I'm hoping. That, if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure that's exactly. I pulled this one off a Fish and Wildlife Service site. So, all right, we are wrapping up here. This is not a bird I taught you. This is one of Bob's photographs. How do you pronounce it? Is it caracara or the?
It's
Bob's
Caracara.
typing away now. Say it again.
It's Caracara. You got it.
Anyway, we didn't talk about these birds. I thought that was a great ending slide. Anyway, that is the end of my presentation. You guys did awesome with your bird ID, at least Jenny. But let's wrap this up here. Got to give huge shout out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bob. I would love for you to give more birding tips because I need them really, really bad. But Bob provided most of the photos. I did steal some from Scott Summershoe. Everett Regal provided a couple of the owl photos, but then I pulled a bunch from the Fish and Wildlife Service. As most of you know, you can go to the website to see what classes are next. Obviously, Trish does a wonderful job with our Twitter page. Follow us on Facebook. And then as far as upcoming webinars, we do have a break. Today is October 17th. Because Halloween's coming up, we're not doing one that week. November 7th, I'm redoing Super Sleepers. It's all about bear hibernation, which is really, really cool. If you've never done that one, it's a really interesting webinar. Then we're going to do another cool one, which is kind of talking about species in general, but we're going to be focusing on keystone species. If you don't know what that is, by all means join us because that's a pretty impressive thing when you learn about keystone species. And then the one I'm most looking forward to, Kim Delosier, spoke to him a few weeks ago. He's going to help me out with bear tails. December 5th, and we're talking the holidays here. We don't want to get into your Christmas time, but literally Kim and I are going to spend a couple of hours. This will probably be at least a 2-hour special, just talking about different bears we have known, but we're also going to be heavily engaged with the audience. And so if people have questions or want to hear a particular story, we're there for you guys. We want it to be a holiday type of spirit. And so we're going to spend a couple hours, gather the family around. By all means, invite your friends to this because this will be a really interesting one. Kim's a fantastic speaker, and he has handled more bears than I have probably ever seen in my entire life. So it's a real treat that he's joining us for that. But other than that, y'all know what we do here at Wildlife for You. So anyway, you guys were awesome. Again, I kept you way too long. And if you have any questions about birds or anything that I cannot answer, I'm going to lean on Bob or some of my other bird specialists. So you guys were great. If you don't have any other questions, I will see you at an upcoming webinar or on Facebook. I'm going to try to be more of a presence on Facebook. So what I'm going to do is stop the recording. And I'm going to apologize on behalf of Adobe. If you had problems with the video or the pictures, when I send the recording, you should be able to watch it without any issues and unfortunately see some of the things you may have missed. So have a great night, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining in, Bob. I really do appreciate it.